What a beautiful thing it is to be in this beautiful space with these beautiful people. And I get the privilege, as a sort of itinerant preacher and director of the UU Prison Ministry of Illinois, to be in different congregations and to be able to hold up the mirror so that you can see your own beauty. The beauty of our Unitarian Universalist faith that reminds us that no one is outside the circle of love. And how beautiful it is that you can go beyond these walls and bring that message of inclusive hope wherever you go. Whether it's supporting LGBTQIA+ youth, who, by the way, are more vulnerable to become incarcerated in Illinois prisons, or whether it's by making sure that children have enriching books to read to allow themselves a way forward in their own imaginations and intelligent brilliance. That we can shine our light further from these walls, and that each congregation I go to has their own particular flavor. And my, isn't it a bright and beautiful place here? And that you've got spiritual friends, or inner life development, conscience developing friends here in this space, whether this is your first time here or your 1,000th. And that the ancestors of this place, even though they were imperfect and flawed, brought forth a message and a legacy that is here today, that we put primacy on always learning and growing and expanding who we are and who we can be, whether that may be a comfortable enterprise or not. And so here I am inviting you to expand once again in a time where there are so many demands on your time, potentially your talent and your treasure. And yet, my invitation is one in which you may hear callings that would bring you joy and fulfillment, and to understand that you yourself can have opportunities for second chances, for redemption, for healing and hope. All these things can be found in community here. And I'll say it's not always easy, right? Living our covenanted life, where we disappoint each other, we let each other down, and at the same time have the power to lift each other up, to grow in relationship and to stretch our hearts, and to push beyond these walls to be in solidarity. And I'll show you a slide here of one of our teachers at the UU Prison Ministry of Illinois is Monica Cosby. And she reminds us that solidarity is a gift. And there's a book in which she's featured a whole chapter that's called Refusing to Abandon, the title of this service. And she reminds people in this chapter from a book called Let This Radicalize You, that we have an opportunity to refuse to abandon each other. And for her, now that she is outside after being over 25 years incarcerated in Lincoln, Illinois at Logan Women's Prison, she reminds us of the power that we have to organize ourselves and to be a presence to one another, to be a presence to the generations, and to show up for each other. And this is wisdom that she garnered during time in prison. So it's very easy to fall into a dynamic of people who are outside have privilege and the people who are inside do not. And in many ways, this is very true. And at the same time, we who are in the free world have so much to learn from those who are inside. The power of presence and the ways that we can show up for each other. Monica shares story after story of how she and the women or people who are female identified would show up for each other in ways that were powerful. There was Mitzi, who always needed her cup of coffee for her mental health. And if she'd run out of money so that she couldn't purchase the coffee at a commissary, you want to bet that everybody would pony up some cash in the commissary so Mitzi could have her coffee. Because they understood deeply how connected we are and how much we need each other and how much we need each other to be okay. There were times in Monica's life where she shares stories about how people around her literally saved her life by accompanying her through the most challenging times when life had no hope. And so we are invited to refuse to abandon one another. And part of the vision of that is an introduction to hearing what abolition is. The definition of prison abolition from the scholar Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who's also a social geographer, describes abolition not as the tearing down of institutions, but about building up the presence of life-affirming institutions. And so the beauty and the gift that I have of getting to do my job is to encounter all of these, hello, I'm talking about you, life-affirming institutions that help build the way towards the world we dream of. And yet there are so many barriers to connection, particularly with those who are locked up. And Barbara explained how isolating it can be, how difficult it is for our pen pals and to be connected with people on the outside world, because often there's an idea that prisons exist to help people get better. And unfortunately, prisons actually exist to punish people. They are there to punish and to isolate people. And we understand in our organization that it is very important to acknowledge that violence happens in this world, that people do wrong, and that it is not okay for people to harm each other. And yet prisons have solved nothing of this problem for us. Pushing people away and treating them like they are disposable does not solve the problem of violence in our country. It exacerbates it. It doesn't allow us, and it shifts the gaze away from us being able to organize our presences and to understand why this is happening in the first place. So I want to show you a picture of me and my friend Lonnie. That's next, I believe. And this is from a few haircuts ago in the last summer when I got to visit my friend. I see him every other month. And Lonnie is very clear, and so are so many, that we need to stay connected with people who are inside to remind them of their own humanity. I know this sounds like a very basic thing, but even in congregational life, I feel like we are always rendering ourselves more human. In a world where sometimes it feels like we're only supposed to be just what we buy and what we consume and what we can produce, we understand that life is more than just transactional. That we, as we gather, become part of this sum of its parts we're bigger and more when we're together. That we, when we gather, call upon something that is sacred in our relationships. And so I'll show you another picture of our other advisory council member, Patrice. And Patrice is someone who reminds us of everything that is possible. Patrice is, when I visit him, it's like visiting a monk. I always learn something new and take something away and also feel more authentically myself when I leave that place. And this is a picture of him with me and another leader with the UU Prison Ministry of Illinois, who's also on the advisory council, Megan Selby. And Patrice reminds us that we can dream of a world that doesn't yet exist. Does that sound familiar, like the work that we do in this religious project called Unitarian Universalism? He says this about visionaries. Visionaries change the world. Think about Isaac Asimov. He imagined self-driving cars, DVDs, Zoom calls, cell phones in his books, in some instances decades before they actually came to be. Fiction is now fact. The same can be true for the disrupting, dismantling, and elimination of the prison industrial complex and its many horrible tentacles. We may not even live to see the fulfillment of this vision. Many visionaries do not. Nevertheless, the legacy endures. What we are doing matters. And friends, what we are doing in this project of trying to be a people of faith and conscience as Unitarian Universalists, it matters. And it matters when we bring that into and inside prisons all over the US, but we're focusing on Illinois. That we can have an organized presence and refuse to abandon one another. That we can companion one another and take the lead from those who are most affected by the ills of the world. Now, that can be an uncomfortable thing, to sift through all those power and privilege differentials and to be humble and take the lead from those who are most affected. And yet what I have found is that it has been the most fulfilling engagement that I have ever done in my life, where I'm in a state of constantly learning, constantly growing, and always messing up. Because we can't always get it right, and it's okay that it's messy work, this learning to be human, this learning to organize ourselves to be a part of that world that we dream of. And part of what we're doing at the UU Prison Ministry of Illinois, we have big dreams. We have dreams of addressing the needs of the people inside by helping get people out. We have short-term goals of addressing the humanitarian issues that people face inside. The summer in particular right now is really difficult with the heat and no access to clean, cold water. We have short-term goals of working with legislators and working with and supporting legislation that can end death by incarceration. So this next photo I'll show you is one of me with my state senator, Laura Fine, who came with me to visit my friend Lonnie, whose picture you've seen and whose words you have heard. And she sat with him for 2 hours, and she learned about his story, and she learned about death by incarceration. Some of you may not know, but parole does not exist in Illinois. So if someone gets a long-term sentence, which was the way to be in the 90s as a legislator, was to be tough on crime and create mandatory minimums and these long-term sentences where people would have natural life without parole. And parole was abolished. And now there is no way for someone who has these long sentences, like Lonnie, who's been in for 35 years, there is no systematic review of people's cases at all. When you're in, and the only way out is potentially through executive clemency from the governor or through the courts, which is messy, difficult, and very expensive and not accessible to most people. Some can get released on a medical, compassionate release, but even that is an uphill battle, even if someone is elderly and at death's door. And Barbara can tell you about that because she's helped organize and gotten someone out. Woo! With that. So death by incarceration is a real thing. And this is what I'll share with Akil says. He's in the next slide. Akil is now out. He's been out since January. And he is an amazing leader, and he's now working in reentry with people who are returning or recently released. And he became an imam when he was in prison. And he quotes the Quran, and he says this: Allah in the Holy Quran says, "Verily, oppression is worse than slaughter." The real death by incarceration is not the pine box, but the suppression of all that it means to be human. So here we are, working on being human with one another, to finally be able to show who we really are and to celebrate that. And then we have folks who are locked up, who are being oppressed and slowly dying. So even though Illinois abolished the death penalty, we still have a death penalty through these long-term sentences. So we're invited to organize our presence. And the reason I say that our organized presence is important is that Ruth Wilson Gilmore talks about how so many people in our society and in our culture Some of you may feel like you belong in this boat or have been abandoned by the state, whether it was that your love was not recognized with your partner, or whether it's that you never had access to resources because you grew up poor. Whatever it is, of being without wealth, or being a person of color, being LGBTQIA+, whatever that is, that the state has abandoned and never been a place of resourcing or of stability. And that's been the case for so many people in the United States population. So that's called being abandoned by the state. So we want to organize our presence and refuse to abandon. So I'll show you the next picture. And these are pictures of people just showing up. And showing up, whether it's the feet one is interesting. What is that? That is a circle that we do, and we do peace circles in our inside ministry. When we go into the Cook County Jail or go into Logan Women's Prison, we sit in circles together, and I can tell you more about that later in the workshop. You'll see pictures of some of our leaders, and including the Reverend Jason Leiden from Second Unitarian in Chicago, and they have just been showing up at their representative's office, talking about what's going on for people inside. And we've got folks in Springfield and with the Bloomington Normal congregation showing up for a clemency hearing to free Bernina Mata, who is a criminalized survivor of gender-based violence, also a lesbian who received an intensely harsh punishment. Most people who are women, particularly if you're queer, you're going to get a longer, harsher sentence. And so it's ways that we can show up for each other as spiritual companions and friends and align with this vision of a repaired, healing world. So Patrice, who I showed you a picture of earlier, designed part of this service with me on one of our visits. And he wants you to sing the closing hymn. He wanted you to sing You've Got a Friend. So let's listen, him having been locked up since 1995. Hear the lyrics again. Ain't it good to know that you've got a friend? When people can be so cold, they'll hurt you, desert you. They'll take your soul if you let them. But don't you let them. And that's the cry that we can bring. That is the gift that we can bring to folks who are inside. Don't let them, friends. We must hold on to our souls for dear life. And in congregational life, we can build connections. Here's a place where you honor transitions, and you honor the best of what it means to be human, or at least we try, where no one is disposable. Everybody has a place to lean on when you're weary. Places like this, so beautiful, can be like this oasis of fortitude, where you can leave feeling lifted up and sparkly and take that light into the world. Ain't it good to know that you have this church, this society, filled with precious, fallible lives, a community that's dynamic and learning, and wow, you might even take some risks together because you've got each other to lean on, that this is a place that's more than the sum of its parts, that your organized presence, you are participating in the repair of the world. Don't doubt it for a second. By already doing what you're doing, if you didn't add anything else, you are enough. But here I am, calling you to organize your presence some more. If you feel called to be part of that, you are part of the repair of the world, that world of Salam, a vision of heaven on earth in the making through community. So here at the UU Prison Ministry of Illinois, which is everywhere in Illinois, we invite you to expand that community. And I give thanks to all the folks who work so hard already as volunteers in this. Big shout out to Barbara and so many others who have done so much to organize a Unitarian Universalist presence inside. And to hold up a mirror, that I get to hold up a mirror to you beautiful, beautiful people. And that we might visibilize those who are locked up. And as my dear friend Lonnie says, this is what builds community in reflections of a mirrored life. Blessed be. Amen.
Visit us at uusg.org.